So I have some time today, and I've decided to document in sort of a really fair documentation the development of this stove project here. And that once again, I just love YouTube, and there's all kinds of people trying to make backpacking efficient trail stoves on the internet. There's one fellow I'll shout out to later who he just makes the most amazing looking stuff, and I'd never made any of these stoves. So you got a clock there because there's going to be a time test to boil a certain amount of water, which I have off camera right now. I'm going to float this in and just go over these different stoves. But also I'm going to have to be in the sun, so I wear black gloves because I'm working with fuel and hot stuff, also with razor blades. And so let's see if we can rotate up. So this is 9:07 in the morning in a suburb of Los Angeles. So those are the 3 stoves that I've produced so far, from left to right. And they all have different features. They all, well, they're all based on my naivety, I guess. Anyway, this was my first stove, and I tried something here, and this is a shout out to somebody, in that if you use the bottom of a can, and normally it would be this way for this pressure ridge, the pressure would be above it in the can. You use it that way, you lose a lot of fuel volume, or supposedly. So I flipped it over so that on my first one. And this was a trick that I've used before in biomedical engineering, but I really didn't have the right silicon rubber. So this is a self-healing fuel port, which I put on the top because I figured, well, you know, silicon rubber's good for 400, maybe 600 degrees. This started off with just these holes in here. There's a plane going into Hollywood, Burbank. And it's still 4,000 or 5,000 feet up. Anyway, I drilled these holes around here, and I made them too big. I made 1mm holes. And so I had 2 fuel burners, but they were too large. And it took too long to preheat, so I added this preheating kind of thing here. And I even had a little like a tray that went in there, but it really, so the first time I ran it, it really didn't work at all, and I was disappointed because I was going to try to make my breakfast, including all my different trail foods. So I sat down and I got out my emergency stove from my survival thing, and I cooked up my breakfast, and then I drilled these holes and I plugged these holes, but it still doesn't regenerate very fast. I don't like this sharp edge on the bottom, and I really wasn't able to figure out a good cap. So that was stove number 1. Now this was my first successful stove, stove number 2. 1.71 ounces dry. It's filled with rock wool, and this was my attempt at a regenerator wire going in 2 places. Flip it over. This was my fuel port again, and I'm going to walk over and grab something here to demonstrate this. I was originally going to use this, so I'll take this piece of paper out of here, because that was an interim fix. If you have the right kind of silicon rubber, you can make a self-healing fuel port. So you just inject in the fuel, you pull it out, and it's supposed to heal, but this didn't heal. So you lose pressure. And if you lose pressure in one of these stoves, well, you lose pressure, it's not really a stove. But it did have a cap, and this was the first one where the preheating isn't wasted. It's like sternocan mode. And you can put this stove out by going like that. And until this thing started leaking, you could put it in your pocket. So now we come to stove number 3. 1.62 ounces dry. It is filled with rock wool. It has these regenerator elements that go down in. I reduced the hole size and put them on the inside. I gave up on the idea. Say I labeled it stove bottom just in case I had a senior moment. Anyway, as you can see, it's formed over the top. Shout out to me if I don't have a really good material for sealing these holes, so they do flare a little bit. And this takes a little bit longer than I think it should, but the great thing is that you can just cap it up. You can put it out, you can cap it, you can put it in your pocket. Carries a little over 2 ounces of fuel, maybe 2.5. I had been targeting 3 ounces of fuel, but unfortunately I didn't, it's a guess. Goes on. So there's stove number 3. So those are the 3 stoves, and the next segment of video is going to be about a test of stove number 3. So this is just a recap at the end of an experiment here. That I spoiled 32 ounces of water, and anybody looking at this stove number 3 experiment, you'll know how long it took and when I stopped and everything. But I wanted to show one of the advantages of this particular design of stove. And there's probably a lot of different ways to do it. And by the way, this is, after all, stove number 3, 1.62 ounces dry weight. That was 32 ounces of water, and it boiled it really well. However, a lot of these stoves, you can't put them out, but I did put this one out. And actually, after you put it out, it's kind of nice and warm, and you can like walk around with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if with the original 2 ounces I can reboil this water if all I do is put in a priming charge here from my little bottle here of this. Let me get this all nice squared up here. Here we go. So we have everything down here, and I'm just going to put in just enough to technically relight it up because I took the cap off. There we go. Now I'm going to put this, whoa, that was hot. So I'm going to put this on here again. Be fair to myself. There's some guy flying his private plane there, but we're going to do that. We're just going to see if there's still enough of the original 2 ounce charge of fuel to come back up and bring this up to a boil again. It's just there we go. Come back down here. It's definitely regenerating again. I can hear I hear the flame, and I can kind of see heat patterns. But some of these fuels are very hot, and it's extremely difficult to see whether or not they're actually burning or not. But yeah, I think we're coming back to the boil here. I'd like to figure out a way to have this thing simmer, and I think I can do that at some point. But right now, this is my entry. I think it works pretty well. All the time points are down. That is atomic time after all. Or so they said when they sold that to me. It's boiling. I think it shows that if I can figure out some way to calm this thing down, I might be able to simmer a soup for a long time. You can see, even though it's uncovered, it's actually quite energetic, and it's quite a boil. Once again, let's do a little time check here. Yeah. Go back to here. And I don't know how this is going to really work in the sun, and so we'll do a shutdown one more time just to show how. There it is. Put it down. As you can see, it's really difficult to see. I don't know if this camera can pick up the heat royals off of this stove, but it's quite hot, and that's why I'm really glad that I'm wearing my super protective gloves. That's it. It's out. You can put this back on. Within about a minute or two, you can take that stove and put it in your pocket as a heat warmer. It won't leak. It's my experiment. Shutting down at that time. So far, looking forward to building stove number 4. So I got a number of different takes here, but I was a little overzealous, and the area that I'm testing in has quite a bit of wind, like even up to 70-mile-an-hour winds through here sometimes. So I am testing outside. There's my clock. I'm going to fly this in, and there's my cat, one of my cats, making a real point. Now, what I have set up here is what I think is a fairly fair test thing. It's just a little windscreen, because I don't want to burn down the neighborhood. And I did have a couple of stove malfunctions at one time or another. So this is stove number 3. This is the way it looks when it's in your pocket. It's a little more compressed. I mean, you can press it in, but swedging really small, thin material is difficult. Stove bottom, just in case I haven't seen your moment. There goes an airplane going into Bob Hope Airport. So, put this down. That is also a way of putting out this stove if it's running. These are regenerator coils. You fill this stove purely from the top. I've got some other stove videos where I built some other stoves. This is sealed up, and this comes down to this, and it's swedged, and there is a gasket material in here. I'm still working on a good seal for the regenerator ports where they go in, and I think this thing is actually still a little bit over drilled, and it does take, it's filled with rock wool so that it doesn't leak. So now, as part of this experiment, someone I really respect, I believe they're in Japan making these kinds of things, I'm going to put 2 ounces of alcohol into this dry stove. Now this stove can be boiled out. You can put this stove in a toaster oven or whatever, so that even if you don't have 100% fuel, if there's some water in the fuel or you get water in the stove, you can just boil it out. Now this is marked, and I should be approaching the 2-ounce limit here. The reason this is done this way is after several stove models, I discovered that you don't want to waste any of the energy in your fuel. We're still not up to 2, and this is dry, so. Oh, you can see a little activity over here, a little boiling as it goes down. It doesn't take that long to fill. Now, in the interest of brevity here, so we put about 2 ounces in here, but we also do have, it's not filling. Okay. Now, you can fill this stove. It holds a little under 2.5 ounces when I did it. Put this lid on. You can put this in your pocket and carry this with you. This is a very tight seal. This will retain the fuel for a very long time. But when you need that fuel, you need that fuel so it doesn't leak. So I'm going to put this over here. And there is a way to swirl it or whirl it or do whatever so that it I'm going to move this up. I'll give you a time check here. Almost, what, 10:11 a.m. here. Aim this down. It's difficult for me to see through these things. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a small amount of alcohol, priming it, which if you put on the lid and you whirl it, you can actually produce that, but it takes some talent. Anyway, so the problem I'm having with this stove is that it does take a little while to regenerate. I think it works really well, and I can tell it's burning. See, and I can push this thing over. Guys, say I've run this without this windscreen, but I've done this basically, and I'm burning it on bricks just for safety. Some of my earlier stoves created a great deal of flame. Now, I wouldn't normally put a pan over something without some water in it, but we're going to get ready for our water here. I've decided that for this test I'm going to use 32 ounces of water. That's a good safe test because 32 ounces of water should be able to, on the trail, produce almost anything. And 32 ounces of water is a good target. 32 ounces of water on 2 ounces of fuel. On stove version number 3. I also am limited right now to 32 ounces of water because you see my lid just fits in there. I put this thing together. I don't want any contamination here, so we'll go here. We'll move our thing back. So what you see is 32 ounces of water on 2 ounces of alcohol. Right now I can smell that it's in sterno mode, which means that the preheating alcohol is actually burning now, and it hasn't really started to regenerate yet. And here's our time thing, and even now I can hear breezes. So what, 10:13, I lit it. There it is. I'm going to shut off the video camera now until this starts to show some kind of activity, and I'll just pan back up to the clock. So I'm doing a quick time check here because wow, this thing's I can tell it's really regenerating now. I can sort of hear it down there just doing its thing. And it's probably going to boil within like 5 minutes. So time check again. At 10:19. Back here, I would say that that's boiling. I would definitely say, but I also understand that if you have like a lid on it, it's not a rolling boil. So, boy, it sure is close. I think it's going to do a rolling boil at 1020. So I'm going to just leave this on so we can see that. And there we have it, folks. A rolling boil. Full on. No question. It's not quite 1020 yet, but there it is. 32 ounces. Now I'm going to let it keep going. Hold on. I have burned myself so many times on getting my gloves and putting them on just to show this last bit of, I don't know. Anyway, so I would say that that would qualify as a really rolling boil. And I will take this off and put it down over here. And this is still like, you can't even see the flames off this thing. It's so efficient. But I do have some film of it running at night. But this is why I needed my gloves, is that let me put this back on. You could just let pasta sit there, do whatever. 32 ounces of 60-degree Fahrenheit tap water. 2 ounces of alcohol total as fuel in the stove, and the total time elapsed is now recorded. That's my submission into the informal YouTube simple stove competition. On the trail I wouldn't have the cream, but I'm just going to treat this like a great big coffee mug. Now, one of the features about this stove that on purpose is that there's just not a lot of ways to shut off some of these stoves. So that's where this lid, which doesn't have a handle right now, but it's out. Nice and safe, and it's out. Now, let's see whether you can do a relight. So squirt a little alcohol on here. And let's see how quickly you can put it out, change stuff out, and do something, and why, looky there. Pretty much, that was quick. This giant tanker of coffee here. I can hear it down under there. That's what it looks like. So once the fuel gets hot, you can put it out. And it is cold out here too. It's in the 40s. It's in the it's about 47 out here. And this water was out, so it was 47 when we started boiling. I realize that's not cold by outdoor standards, but another thing I like about this stove is it's such a nice clean flame that if I had to warm up the inside of tent or something. I wouldn't be afraid to operate that if I had some minimum ventilation. That definitely helps, I suppose, to